Street.
Airport Commission. Roll call, please.
Bruce Miller,
Here.
Kirk Martin,
Here.
Craig Arcuri, Patricia Griffin,
Here.
Carl Hopkins,
Here.
Karen Kahn,
Here.
Jim Wilson.
Here.
All right, thank you. I've had a request to take two items out of order. We will address item 8, the Master Plan Update Historic Structures Report, as the first item in administrative reports, followed by item 7. So we'll be just reversing the order of item 7 and 8. And do we have any other changes to the agenda?
No other changes, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Public comments. This is the portion of the agenda where any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on any subject within its jurisdiction for items that are not scheduled before it this day. We take the items, the public comment items for an item with the item. I do have 4 speaker slips. They look like they are all item 8. Do we have any public comment for non-agenda items?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. That brings us to notices that the following committees met as noted in the Airport Administration Conference Room, or met in the conference room as posted. We had the budget subcommittee on Wednesday, October 15th, the lease review subcommittee on Monday, October 20th, and the Airport Master Plan Committee on Tuesday, October 28th. And on Friday, November 14th at 5:30 p.m., the airport secretary duly posted this agenda. All right, minutes. We have the minutes presented to us. Do we have a motion? We'll waive the reading and motion.
I move that be approved as read or stated.
Second.
All right. Okay. All in favor of approving minutes as presented?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Minutes approved. And that brings us to the consent calendar. We have 2 items, so lease agreement with Athena Contractors and the property management report for October. Prior to moving for consent on that, I believe we have just a quick update on the property management report. Rebecca Fribley, thank you.
Part of an update on the property management report, we thought we'd take advantage of the fact that this meeting is televised and promote some of our properties that are currently vacant and available. The 3 that I wanted to point out to you tonight are in Building 224, 6160 Francis Botello Road. We have 2 separate 800-square-foot offices with private restrooms, and those, depending on the use, industrial or office, would rent from anywhere between $1.40 and $1.09 per square foot per month. We also have the former Flight Services building, 1503 Cecil Cook Place, has the center section available at 3,995 square feet, which can be used for either aviation uses or possibly office R&D on a less than 5-year lease at $1.35 per square foot per month. And we also have 90 Dean Arnold Place, the former Forest Service building, which currently has 3,042 square feet of office or R&D space available at $1.11 per square foot. And if anyone is interested in these properties, please contact me at 692-6022. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
All right. Thank you for that update. So the consent calendar, 2 items. Do I have a motion?
I move we approve the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
All right. All in favor of approval of the consent calendar?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Consent calendar carries. Thank you. And this brings us to our liaison reports. I know we have at least our City of Santa Barbara Council Member Frank Hotchkiss. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number of things. The public has been meeting or exceeding the 20% call for reduction on drought, on water usage. So that's all good. We had a smattering of rain, which was not obviously enough, and we're hoping for more this week. There's a request for proposal out to 4 pre-qualified firms regarding the desalination plant I think, as I've mentioned before, the final decision won't be made until we absolutely have to, which is in April, unless it rains. We continue to use our water supplies in the meantime, including both groundwater and purchased water from the state. Regarding TOT, they are up almost 25% this last month over the previous, but we had an extra day or two, so that was partly responsible for it. But it's indicating a healthy economy locally. Another indication is that we're getting more and more appeals at City Council regarding buildings, et cetera. So that's another indicator that things are better. Regarding downtown safety, the City Council approved six community service officers plus an additional police position citywide. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I don't believe we have a City of Goleta representative. All right. Thank you. It brings us to administrative reports, and as noted, we will take the master plan update item 8 report prior to the SLU management report.
That's correct. This evening, Chair Miller, the master plan update historic structures report will be presented by Andrew Vermont, and we are interested in receiving comments and input so that we can carry that forward to the various review bodies. So, Andrew?
Mr. Chair and Planning Commissioner, or Airport Commissioners, thank you. I'll go through the sort of the status of the airport master plan over the past year or so, the role of CEQA in that process, and then I'll delve in with more detail to the historic structures that were analyzed in the historic structures report, specifically the General Western Aero hangars, the former Marine Corps Squadron hangars 1, 2, and 3, and also the one of the former squadron warehouses and hangar 4 and 5. And then we'll talk about what options are available under CEQA to address those historic structures and the next steps in the planning process. So I believe that you've seen this before. This is the schedule that we prepared for the airport master plan, and we went through a number of public meetings with our master plan advisory committee and public workshops where members of the public came in and provided input and asked questions. And we're now all the way down, almost at the end of the CEQA process. But this one particular item has its own schedule to follow. And so, as you can see, it's a little bit complicated, hard to read up there. But we began this earlier this year, and we're now about halfway through where we're actually drafting an environmental impact report. So just for the basics on what the California Environmental Quality Act is, or CEQA, it's a public disclosure law that requires governments look before they leap with regards to impacts to the environment. A government agency, before it makes a discretionary action, has to disclose the analyze and disclose the environmental consequences to the public, receive comment from the public, and respond to every public comment. And then any significant environmental impact that will result from the project needs to be justified with a statement of overriding consideration. In CEQA, we identify a number of different impact classes. Starting with the most significant is Class 1. That's a significant unavoidable environmental impact that will have some sort of detrimental effect to the environment. Class 2 is significant but mitigable. It's a significant impact, but we can reduce it in other ways, say replacement plantings for loss of vegetation. Class 3 is less than significant. That's there's an effect on the environment, but it doesn't meet any thresholds for significance, so it's not as severe as the others. And then Class 4, beneficial, rarely exists, but every once in a while there's some sort of project element that's beneficial. Say a wind farm might be beneficial to air quality because it's reducing fossil fuel dependency. And then no impact is just where it doesn't apply. It's not relevant at all to the project. So at the beginning of this year, we did an initial study under CEQA on the build-out of the airport master plan, there are 17 issue areas that we look at in CEQA, and we go through them by those classes and try to assess what issue areas we have the greatest concern for. The first thing that we do is we identify the issue areas where we're going to have no environmental impact. Agricultural resources, mineral resources is not relevant to the airport master plan. And then the next we identified issue areas where we would have environmental impacts, but they would be less than significant. It would be, say, the addition of a single car trip generally isn't a traffic impact. So these are minimal environmental impacts. And then impacts that we've identified as significant but we know we can mitigate are to geology and soils and hazards. Hazards is generally related to aviation hazards, which is something that the airport's very familiar with and works on. And the geology impacts are normally seismic. And again, that's something that we have a lot of experience with development in a seismic zone. The potentially significant impacts that remain then are the issue areas that we look at in the environmental impact report with the most detail. And in this case, for the airport master plan, we'll be looking at air quality, biological resources, water quality, cultural resources, land use, transportation, and public services. And so for today, we're going to talk about one of those, and that's the cultural resources issue area. That issue area is divided into two principal groups, archaeological resources and historic resources. For archaeological resources, at the planning level, it's relatively simple. We will identify, we've directed development at previously disturbed areas, so we're unlikely to have additional fines. And we will follow the recommendations of the 2009 Master Archaeological Resources Report when we're doing ground disturbance in sensitive areas. That's to have a Chumash, most likely descendant, and archaeological monitor on site during those earthworks. Now with respect to historic resources, we know that we have buildings that could potentially be eligible for listing in one of the historic categories. And so we contracted Applied Earthworks to prepare a historic structures report to analyze those. Specifically paying attention to two periods that are the early 20th century aviation and the mobilization and waging of the Second World War. Now, there's generally four categories for historic resources, at least in Santa Barbara. These are sort of in order of prestige or difficulty to acquire. Is the National Registry of Historic Places that's run by the National Park Service, the California Registry of Historic Resources, which is a state program from the State Parks Department, and then the city has two additional designations. They're City Landmark and City Structure of Merit. And the General Western Aero hangars meet all of these criteria. They are not eligible as a Structure of Merit because they're eligible as a city landmark. They meet the first criteria for both categories, that they're associated with events that have made a significant contribution to broad patterns of our history, specifically early 20th century aviation and California aviation. The squadron hangars are eligible as city structures of merit. They do not meet the other significance criteria because of their they're not unique structures. They're the kind of structure that the Navy and the Marine Corps were building across the western United States at the time. However, they remain local examples of Navy-designed hangars that were modified for Marine Corps usage in World War II, and they contribute to the visual character of the airport, so the Historic Structures Report sees them as eligible for listing as a structure of merit. The other three structures that we looked at in the Historic Structures Report were the Squadron Warehouse and hangars 4 and 5. They've been too heavily modified over the remaining 20th century to meet any eligibility criteria. Doors have been relocated, there have been additions and windows moved, and there's just not enough of the original material to meet that threshold. Therefore, under the California Environmental Quality Act, the removal of these buildings would be a less than significant impact. Now, originally in the draft master plan that was released in June, we had the hangars 1 and 2 scheduled for demolition over on the west side of the parallels. Hangar 3 would be an option to demolish or retain for the fixed space operator that's was selected for that site. And then also because of their poor condition and their position in the floodway, the general western aero hangars were scheduled for demolition as well. We asked Kaufman Associates, who have been working on the airport master plan, to devise a preservation concept that would look at preserving as much as we could. And we would leave hangars 1 and 2 on site and have hangar 3 remain as either an option for the FBO to add to their leasehold if they wanted to use it as a hangar, or if they felt that that was a liability, then we could exclude it from the FBO lease area and leave that as city managed. And we would relocate rather than demolish the general western aero hangars either to alternative site 1 or alternative site 2. These are two sites where we've seen at least they fit and could be used, restored in those locations and used as hangars, which is their original design. Now, there are a number of constraints with doing anything with historic structures, and one of those is cost. The restoration in place of the general western aero hangars would cost about $750,000, and relocation would cost about $2.5 million. The other option that remains available is to mothball them, which is essentially to leave them as condemned buildings that are monuments to the past. They would have there would be no public access, nor would there be any economic activity going on in those locations, but they would be preserved in place. That is certainly the cheapest option, but it is, I think, the least satisfying because no one really gets it to do anything with them. Of course, there's also the option to demolish them under a statement of overriding consideration. Also, according to the Historic Structures Report, the decision to take no action is a Class 1 significant impact because it would result in their demolition by neglect. Now, with hangars 1, 2, and 3, these are the options are a bit simpler. You either demolish them or you do not. Preserving them in place is the environmentally preferred option because it avoids the environmental impact. Demolishing any one of the hangars would be the removal of a potential structure of merit and is therefore a Class 1 significant impact under CEQA. So we'll be taking the Historic Structures Report to the Historic Landmarks Commission for their review and acceptance next month. And we will formalize the project description when we get back from the New Year break. Then we will release the draft environmental impact report in May, and we are hopeful that we will be then certifying the environmental impact report and adopting the airport master plan at City Council in the summer. And so that's the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So my understanding of the item tonight is that we are not making any decision, but this is a comment opportunity, and those comments will be forwarded to the Historic Landmarks Commission as part of the package. So there's no action tonight. It's comments, right?
That's correct. We're looking for comments both from the Commission and from the public that we would then forward both to the Historic Landmarks Commission and Planning Commission as we move through the process.
Okay, perfect. So let me give the commissioners an opportunity to ask questions, and then we will open it up to public comment. I do have 4 speaker slips, but don't panic if you didn't get a slip in. We will have an opportunity for anybody else who has comment. So questions on the presentation?
I'll have comments later.
More comments? Okay.
Yeah, it seems like the options are pretty clear.
Okay. Very good. Well, then, if we'll have discussion after public comment then. Said we have 4 slips. The first, Mr. Gordon Feingold, Santa Barbara.
Chair and Commissioners, I'm Gordon Feingold. I've been hanging around the airport for 40 years, as many of you know. And I know that speaking to you directly on this matter, it may not have the influence, but maybe I can bring to bear the viewpoint of some pilots that I did, as I did for the hangars 12 years ago. But I think I was just up in the Bay Area and drove across the new Bay Bridge up there. And as I was doing that, the guy I was with pointed out that they are demolishing the old Bay Bridge, which was probably about from the same era, and also is, as I think these hangars are, infrastructure. And so I think a lot of us had that viewpoint that this is infrastructure that has had a purpose but is no longer suitable for that purpose. So I'm a little concerned that we're throwing the functionality of this facility under the bus of buildings that are not utilized for historical or any other purposes, really. I'm thinking of like in the main terminal, in the airport terminal, we did preserve a part of that old structure. I think is great, and I think preserving, perhaps one of the larger hangars, I think it's great. That's great, but preserve everything or all of them at the cost of the functional requirements of an airport that we've been waiting as pilots for a very long time to have is not to the best interest of the community, not just as pilots, but just for the functional aspects of the airport and general aviation to be able to utilize these facilities in the furtherance of commerce and the benefits of the whole city. So maybe I'll have to get out the old red hangars again and maybe get us pilots organized and maybe have some of the public influence that is called for as part of this process. Maybe we need to bring that to bear. But I'd hate to see all of this good planning be thrown in knots and tied upside down for buildings that I think most of it, having been here at the airport 40 years, I don't remember anybody coming by going, hey, let's tour this old boneyard building. I don't think anybody has ever done that or would really want to do that. I mean, we know what those are. So anyway, that's my comment, and I'd like to become involved should our influence be necessary to get the job done that we all want to get done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And I should have mentioned that do try to limit your comments to about 2 minutes. All right. Thank you. Next, Mr. Bob Gates.
Good evening. I'm a resident. I live in Montecito. I'm a pilot, have been for many years, and have been flying in and out of Santa Barbara Airport for on and off 30 years. I would support more facility and area for general aviation as a higher and better use than having old abandoned buildings, old hangars that served a purpose in the past, but in my view are obstructing more utilization of the airport for general aviation at this time. Generally support the airport plan, but would like to see more T hangars, more transient parking, more ability for general aviation. I fly part-time for business. It would be much more convenient for me to use Santa Barbara. I would prefer that. Oftentimes I'm not able to, shortage of hangars and so on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Mark Harris of Santa Barbara.
Commissioners, my name is Mark Harris. I'm a local pilot, been using the field since 1989 as a pilot, and I concur with Gordon Feingold and Bob Gates and appreciate historic value, but right now I think the question is utility and planning for the future, and I think that hangars 1 and 2 certainly should be demolished and that space be made available, and I don't think funds should be allocated to their preservation or their reconstruction elsewhere on the airport. Thanks.
And just, I want to be clear, you were talking about 1 and 2 and mentioning relocation. I don't believe that
I'm
relocation
sorry.
1 and 2 was.
I mean, the Western Aero hangars, the old Boneyard hangars are the ones that I think should be removed and that area used constructively.
Okay. Right. 1 and 2 are the ones to the
Oh, I'm sorry.
to the left side there. Right?
Okay. Thank you for correcting me.
Okay. Thanks. Mr. John Wiley.
I want to express my appreciation to all of you for the work you do and to the airport businesses on the field. I'm a small piston pilot. I may look tall, but I'm a small piston pilot. My wife and I have flown all over the continent, every state and province in North America. Santa Barbara is one of the 2 or 3 most expensive we've ever visited. So my big thing is transient parking. I would love to see transient parking here that would be compatible with and complementary to the FBOs that do such a great job for us. And in regard to the impact of the buildings on that, I was wondering if you could back up to the slide that had the initial environmental impact of the full list, because as I recall, recreation was on there. And I believe that right now, we're not putting enough emphasis on the recreational and public services capabilities that could be greatly enhanced by adding more space for transient aviation. I wonder if anyone has any questions or follow-up on that? Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers on this item? All right. Thank you all. Comments from the commission? Go ahead.
Well, I would agree with all of the speakers that spoke here today, and while also, very cognizant of the importance of historic structures both in Santa Barbara and throughout the country in general, believe that there have to be some limits. In the case of hangars 1, 2, and 3, they're identical, basically. The idea of preserving all 3 of them significantly impacts the function of the airport and significantly impacts the master plan. The master plan took over a year to generate, had probably a half a dozen meetings of a committee of some 25, and 4 public sessions. It's been on the airport website in varying stages for probably 2 years. Lots of people had a lot of time to comment, and up until now, there hasn't been, and those hangars had been planned to be removed. Now, the original did plan for 1, 2, and 3. The airport has suggested, and I would fully support, the retention of 3. It is has been brought up, as I understand the current code, has been made handicap accessible, and can be utilized either by the airport or by an FBO as would be determined in the future. But 1 and 2, I believe, should be removed. It makes way for the transient parking. It makes way for access to future planned T-hangars. The issue of the General Aero, Western General Aero, of the 3 options listed, I could support the $4,000 a year to, quote, mothball them, I think was a term you used, with the idea that if some external funding source chooses to pop for $750 or $2.5 million or $1.25 million or whatever the number might be, I believe that the airport could probably find a place to relocate them or allow them to stay where they are. Leaving them where they are in a flood path, to me, makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I don't know whether you have any photos on there of the floods available to pick up, but I've seen multiple, at least 3 different sets in 3 different time frames where some of the shorter people here would have a hard time keeping their head above water, and in those same hangars. And in addition, as I understand, because it's a flood path, I've seen water flowing over that bridge down there that would wipe, it includes trees and brushes and rocks and mud and everything else. So to spend $750,000 to restore them in place, to me, would be entirely foolish. It's very clear, looking at the airport budget, that there's not going to be $2.5 million or even $1.25 million to restore and fix them anytime in my lifetime, it doesn't look like. And it would take some kind of an amazing miracle to generate anywhere near that. On the other hand, mothballing them for $4,000 a year with the hope that maybe if somebody else is really interested in their history to restore them and move them, I would certainly support the airport doing its utmost to find a place for them someplace on the airfield. And if it's appropriate, I know you mentioned that there isn't an action item to be taken here, but if other commissioners agree, I wonder if a statement similar to that would be appropriate for a vote of the commission as a recommendation from the commission.
As a point of order, I'm not sure, since it's not an agenda item, that we could turn it into an action item.
Correct.
But we appreciate your comments, and I guess we could take that up. Could I just get a couple facts checked here on this? So there's been a concern about transient parking. The first question is, do we have anything that substantiates that there is currently a lack of transient parking? And the second question I had was, so hangars 1, 2, and 3 are large hangars currently. And my question is, and presumably they're both occupied with large planes, are they not?
I guess we'd have to define large planes.
Well, large,
Hangar
yeah.
1, when I was most recently in Hangar 1, it seemed like there were 4 aircraft, one of which was 3 fixed wing, and then 1 helicopter. Hangar 2 has offices reserved for certain GA tenants, but I'm not sure about the aircraft that is stored there. There's 4 stored in there, thank you. And then Hangar 3 is a maintenance hangar. And as you indicated earlier, it has been brought up to city code. But it is used for maintenance. And of course, aircraft will be stored there as they were being worked on.
Okay. So my question about the size of them really revolved around...
They're about 9,600 square feet.
The capacity we have for larger aircraft.
Large aircraft like Gulfstreams or larger would have to be housed in the ampersand hangars. And there are folks here in the audience, I'm sure, who can clarify that, but I think I'm correct.
So I think it's Hangar 2 that's over by the T hangars.
Mm-hmm.
I see planes that are bigger than a Cessna 172 in those kinds of hangars, which T hangars do not accommodate.
Right. And then a large business 737 sets outside, yes.
Right. So my concern was basically, what would this removing those hangars do in terms of impact to not the big business jet, but say the small, or the mid-size, not the 172, but just larger twins.
I would say it could impact up to 12 aircraft on the field.
That might not otherwise fit in a T hangar. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, thank you. And then the transient parking, there's been several parties expressed concern about transient parking.
You'll probably recall when we were having options for future development, that was one of the items that several general aviation pilots had expressed an interest to have an area close to self-fueling so that they could come in. We recognized that because of the security on the field, it would still have to be managed, but it would allow an option rather than going to an FBO for transient aircraft to come into the field, take on fuel, spend the night, and enjoy the area.
Right. So maybe somebody could clarify. So is the issue really, does it revolve around the idea that leaving hangars 1 and 2 in place would prevent transient parking?
Well, as you see from the blue line up there that we were looking at just a second ago, that was the area that the master plan designated as airport-controlled transient parking. And Hangar 1 sits right square in the middle of that. The second thing is that the two yellow additional T hangars, Hangar 2 sits basically in the area that was to be the taxiway to get access to them. With Hangar 2 there, you're not really going to be able to put those additional hangars in. And with Hangar 1 there, even that blue line in subsequent study, I believe, may be a little bit close, particularly once you extend taxiway hotel, which is an important safety issue. So basically, if you leave 1 and 2 there, I think you're going to just about, well, you substantially impact the possibility of airport-controlled transient parking, which was certainly one of the major issues that a lot of pilots spoke to during the master planning process.
Certainly, yeah. And the master plan, as we all recall, is a demand-based plan. It's you know, it's in response to demand that might evolve, but it was my first question was really trying to understand if there is that demand right now. Commissioner Khan, I believe you had a question.
I was curious to know if there's any particular process with the state where one can apply in certain circumstances for exemption from their historic landmarks criteria, or, I mean, you could go on mitigating it with $4,000 a year at some point, you know, hoping some savior would come by. But given, I think, the benefit of aviation to the state, do they have any kind of process whereby you can apply to be exempt on a case-by-case basis?
I believe, as Andrew indicated, that would be the City Council taking a position of overriding the impact.
Yeah, that's correct. That the state does not get into the business of making land use decisions. They just dictate the process that we have to go through. So that remains a local decision, and it would ultimately be up to City Council to decide whether to make a statement of overriding consideration to say that on the balance, the project benefits outweigh the environmental costs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other comments? Questions? All right. With that, then, we will move on to item 7.
Thank you.
Was the slough maintenance. There we go. The Goleta Slough Management Committee Management Plan.
This, as you know, the airport has currently 952 acres. Approximately half of that acreage is the Goleta Slough Reserve. And the airport has played an important role over the years in its maintenance and improvement. So I thought it would be interesting for you to get a history lesson tonight from Ms. Pat Saley, who was with us in the very beginning. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce Pat Saley, who is our liaison, the airport's liaison to the Goleta Slough Management Committee. Pat?
All right. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Is that on?
I think so.
Yeah? Okay. As Hazel said, my name's Pat Saley. I've been involved in airport planning issues for a long time. I worked in city planning from 79 to 88 and was the project manager on the airport master plan, the original EIR that was done in the mid-80s, and I was the project manager on the first airport Goleta Slough local coastal plan that got approved by the Coastal Commission. And then I left the city, but I have worked with the airport folks all this time. So I started as a toddler. And I do know a lot about the history, and it's pretty interesting, and there is some groundbreaking things that have been done by the airport, by the Goleta Slough Management Committee. So some history, and also for you to help understand sort of the value of collaboration, and I think that's one of your mantras, but we have accomplished a lot collectively by collaborating with people, and I'd like to give you a feeling of what has been done. In retrospect, much better, thank you. The 1984 Airport Master Plan, EIR, took a while to finally complete. It was later in the 80s, but it had some projects in there that were very controversial, and a lot of that related to its location in adjacent to the slough. So this was with a airport director prior to Karen Ramsdale and Hazel Johns, literally a whole group of engineers, hydrologists, biologists were in this room for hours on end going, how are we going to deal with these environmental impacts? And the threat, the unspoken threat was you can't leave the room till you figure this out, which wasn't quite true. But the idea of how important the slough was, and you can't look at it in a vacuum, you have to look at the whole area. That was the concept behind the Goleta Slough Management Committee. And a mitigation measure for a Class 1 unavoidable impact was to create this committee. And around that same time, or a couple of years later in 1991, the Goleta Slough Ecological Reserve was created, and what used to be California Department of Fish and Game, now they're Fish and Wildlife, they theoretically manage much of the slough on airport property, but they're pretty passive managers given budget realities and such. So the Goleta Slough Management Committee was established in 1991, and the whole idea was to look at this whole area, and I'll show you the geographic area in just a moment, but look at it as one, irrespective of roads, irrespective of jurisdictional lines, that sort of thing. And one of the other key things, I think, to our success over the years is we've always been advisory. We do not take positions on projects or plans. If Airport Master Plan, for example, we will definitely be involved in the taxiway hotel extension that's proposed to the west. We're not saying it's a good idea, a bad idea. We're saying if it happens, here's what we think you need to do to mitigate for that. We have prepared a plan that I'll show you in a moment that we're in the process of updating. Here is the area, and as you can see, the airport and the slough are pretty much right in the middle of it. This 2,200-acre area tries to take in undeveloped land. For example, over here on the right, that's Moore Mesa. We've got like where the gas company has their facility, relatively, at least on the surface, undeveloped. There are something like 6 or 7 creeks that lead into the slough, so we went along those creeks. But we were trying to say what really influences the slough. Let's have it be all in this one area that we try to manage in an advisory way, but together. And part of the reason that this was somewhat groundbreaking at the time, it's much more common now. There's a lot of joint powers agreements and things like that where a resource is managed by many. But this was in the early 90s, and it was not common. But the darker red, that's the Goleta Slough boundary, ecosystem boundary. The dotted line is the coastal zone boundary, so the Coastal Commission has definitely been a big partner. But what's really important is, obviously, the sort of rust color is City of Santa Barbara jurisdiction. UCSB right here in the blue. The yellow is all county, and subsequent to beginning this process, we now have the City of Goleta in 2002. So all these players are involved, but what matters is we have one resource, and we try to stay away from, well, where exactly is the boundary? So in our whole plan, this is the only map that shows the jurisdictions, because they really don't matter. It matters how this can all be sort of managed in the best way for all parties. as one. So zeroing in on the airport, this is a slide showing the Gleetaslew Ecological Reserve, most of which is on airport property, except for this little portion right here that we'll talk about in a moment. But when you see how the airport juts, or this is 725, it really extends into the reserve, and the taxiway H is along here. That would require changing the boundaries of this reserve, rezoning, local coastal plan amendments, etc. It's been done before when the runway got shifted 800 feet to the west. Similar sort of process. And again, through collaboration and trying to work together for the greater good, that project was accomplished, and that was no mean feat. So for the Gleetaslew Management Committee, I put quote marks around members because it's a pretty fluid membership, if you will. It really depends what issue we're talking about. If it's a flooding issue, of course, flood control's there, and vector control probably as well, because they're always concerned when you have standing water and such. If we're working on the west end, it's those property owners or whatever. It just depends what we're working on. There is a core group of about 12 people, agencies, organizations that come to pretty much every meeting, but it varies. And we tend to meet on an ad hoc basis. We're not just trying to have meetings for meeting's sake. When we have an issue, we have a meeting. And we often get very good turnout because people know we're a problem-solving group, and they like that. The funding initially was primarily the airport and the FAA. My time, Andrew's time, the preparation of the original master plan was part of the mitigation, so that was airport, FAA, and some projects that I'll show you very briefly in and around the slough. But especially in about the last 5 years, lots of other partners have really stepped up. And the Coastal Conservancy is a big one. They have funded a lot of things that the Gleetaslew Committee, the airport, is involved in. We got a Santa Barbara County CREF grant and a Coastal Resource Enhancement Fund, I think. UCSB has funded things. We also updated the master plan. It was done in '97. The existing conditions report, that was a $50,000 grant from Fish and Wildlife. So other than staff time, no airport funding. I'll show you as I go through some of the things we've accomplished, but through our support and encouragement, 175 acres has been restored, and this is like wetland habitat, that sort of thing. About half of that is on the airport, generally tied to airfield safety projects, so the required mitigation. And we also write letters to agencies on projects that affect creeks or wetlands or whatever, again, trying to encourage them to just make them better. And we don't say we're in favor of or we're opposed to. We're just trying to look at the area as a whole and make it all work as well as it can. We did this plan in '97. It did get incorporated into the Airport Gleetaslew Coastal Plan, which is a big deal. The Coastal Commission approved it. And here are some of the projects. I'll run through a few, but you can see the airport and FAA have funded a lot of projects in this area. And by doing all this mitigation in here, it has allowed a lot of airfield safety projects. The runway safety area grading project and the shifting of the runway to the west are the two biggest that pop in my head. Mm-hmm. Here's a list, and I'll show you some pictures. It's about 86, 87 acres total, which is a lot. When you figure the slough itself is roughly 400 acres, is that about right? Mm-hmm. So 20% or so has been restored, and that is pretty impressive. The biggest project is the relocation of the creek, and it had been relocated in the mid-'70s. I think they added about 1,000 linear feet to it, and you'll see old pictures of Tecolotido, and it has all these right angles, which Nature doesn't like right angles. That was definitely man-made. So when this project was done, much more trying to recreate a more natural alignment for the creek. And one of the mitigation measures coming out of that shifting of the runway was the idea of restoring tidal circulation to these basins that previously had been tidal, but because of sand accretion, sediment, etc., they were cut off and they'd become sort of brackish. And this took a lot of convincing, because right here is the Belding Savannah sparrow, very small bird. It's California endangered species, and it's sitting on pickleweed. And the whole idea is where you have tidal basins, this is the type of plant and the type of bird. But twice a day it gets wet, and the FAA originally thought of it in terms of, oh no, that means so many more birds, this is bad from a bird strike hazard aspect. Here is a female mallard, and I tried to make this picture small, this one big, because she is considerably bigger than this little Belding Savannah sparrow. And when you have these basins that just fill up for months on end, if we ever get rain, ducks are definitely what you do not want to have near aircraft. And it took a lot of persuading and showing of good faith. I think confidence in the airport. The Gletis Slough Committee was very strongly behind us, that they let this tidal experiment go on. And it has national implications, because there are lots and lots of airports that sit in wetlands. So this was a big deal, and we're all very happy with the way it turned out. These are the two basins. They don't look too glamorous here, but they're not nearly as conducive for ducks and geese as they are for the smaller birds that don't really present a problem for aircraft. This is looking from UCSB, this area in the foreground here, Area I. I have never seen such big poison oak as there was there. It was like redwood size. It was crazy. And a lot of work was done, and that was also mitigation for the creek relocation. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot, and there's always follow-up, making sure the poison oak and such doesn't come back. But that was a very big project. Las Vegas Creek, before and after. Here are projects, okay, I've shown you these. There has been a lot of work done. That's, is that San
Jose?
San Jose, that's right. And here's Atascadero, Maria Ignacia there. Through collaboration, Audubon has done a lot of these projects, but again, with our support, and when they go for grants, we write letters, and it's on the order of 175 acres that has been restored over the last 20 years or so. And that's not easy with the price of land and such in this community. One of the other projects, this is actually here you can see the old alignment of Tecolotido with the right angles and such. But Fish and Game, or Fish and Wildlife, they own these two parcels that they actually got from Caltrans, because originally 217 was supposed to swing around and go at the foot of the North Bluff and go across here and tie into either Los Carneros or over to Stork, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But it was one of those deals, one California governmental agency giving land to another, but Fish and Game never had money to restore these, and there was a lot of rubble, kind of a mess. And they, through some mitigation money from another project, that was about $900,000, and the Gletis Slough Committee was, as part of this mitigation, they said, we want that committee to lead where we spend this money and to try to do the most good. It was spent on these two pieces of land, 20 acres or so, as I recall.
Yeah.
Total. And that, because of its proximity to the slough, we've got East Stork Wetlands, West Stork Wetlands. I mean, this is really valuable, this to sort of fill in the gaps there. So again, a project we heartily supported. Something we've been pushing for from day one is the Goleta West Sanitary District pipe relocation that is almost complete. And here we have East Stark Wetland, so here's the airport and runways over here. Mesa Road right there, Los Carneros. The red dotted line was the original alignment of the sewer line right through the wetland. So they had to maintain roads, and we heard stories that you would probably not believe in terms of the crazy things students in Isla Vista put in sewer lines and the challenges to maintain these. So this is a big deal that they're almost completed moving the line to the road. It is such a win-win. It's good for the habitat. It's much easier for them to maintain, and everybody wins. It was quite a big ticket item, but we, the Goleta Slough Committee, also heartily supported this project. In the early 2010, 2011, we started talking more about sea level rise and flooding, and we'd seen some pretty wild storms, El Nino storms. So step one in updating the master plan and looking at sea level rise was to first update the 97 plan. So this is the one that Fish and Wildlife put up $50,000, and we brought everything, 12, 14 years forward. And then we talked more about flooding. This is 1969. And probably if we looked in the back, we could see the hangars you were talking about.
Yep.
The original terminal. And this has happened more than once, as everybody knows. But flooding has become a bigger issue. And the main runway is, 9, 10, 11 feet
11.
Above sea level. And that's a concern. So we started saying we really need to properly update the master plan and we need to look at sea level rise. But how can we do that? That takes money. So, this issue too, there's Andrew watching the barely
Ill-fated.
Successful siphoning, or the straw as we called it, when the mouth to Goleta Slough at Goleta Beach closed and the various regulatory agencies would not allow the city or flood control to reopen it because of concerns about endangered species. So this is another issue. It goes hand in hand with flooding and sea level rise. So we embarked on doing a sea level rise vulnerability assessment. And this is kind of hard to see, but the dark blue is 0.5 meters, what is that?
Foot and a half.
Pardon?
Foot and a half, 18
Yeah,
feet.
1.5 feet. I mean, that's areas of concern. The lighter blue shows, 4 feet, 1.4 meters. And they used sort of white, which I think was a mistake, but 2 meters, we're at 9, 10 feet, and it's over quite a bit of the airfield. It also is flooding or would flood, Fowler here. And, the Goleta sanitary plant sits at about 14 feet, but the roads leading to it would potentially be underwater. So, people have differing opinions about this issue, but clearly given the airport, given the Goleta Slough ecosystem area, it's something that makes them very vulnerable. So we looked into preparing this study, looking at what adaptations, ideally natural ones, you let gravity feed or whatever, do handle a problem, or relocating things. But there's a lot of issues that we looked into, and we solicited a lot of comments from a lot of people to develop this report. This is Jeremy Lowe, who's the project manager on the sea level rise report. And, you got to take the years with a grain of salt. 2050, it could happen sooner, could happen later, but pretty much universally by 2100, they're predicting 55 feet. Or excuse me, inches. Feet, that would be something. Which is almost 6 feet. Yeah. And that's a lot. And the occurrence of major storms, like where we saw the terminal looking like Mont Saint-Michel, that kind of thing is expected to occur more frequently. You have more, the sea level's higher, change in storm patterns, more flooding. So this is a big issue. So this assessment, and we're also updating the master plan, this is one of the first in this area. City of Santa Barbara is updating the LCP. We have the airport master plan that will look at these issues. We're looking at the mouth, closure of the mouth issues. Santa Barbara County is looking at sea level rise. City of Goleta is updating their LCP to talk about sea level rise. So our plan is first. The others are all going to build on it. And it has a lot of, it's just a really good place for everyone to start and agree on methodology and that sort of thing. Let me just back up one moment. This study, the airport put in, I think it was $15,000. It was a nominal amount. The study is about $100,000. We practically had bake sales to earn money. We did get $50,000 from Coastal Conservancy. We got money from Goleta West, Goleta Valley Land Trust. So we definitely are collaborating more in terms of raising funds to do this study. It should be done early next year. We're incorporating some of the information that the airport is developing from their various studies. So we're trying to make it a good sort of foundation for everyone else's work to be done, and then having everyone agree on methodologies so it all really works together and it's the most efficient way. So
it's a great shot.
That is a great shot. I think, did Rebecca take it?
Lynn Houston.
Lynn Houston, probably.
And we gave Karen, when she left, a plaque because she was very instrumental in this whole process, and Hazel's been very involved. We put that picture and gave her a plaque, and it seemed sort of epitomized everything. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Some really valuable work, and we really thank you and your group for all your commitment on that.
It's been fun as well.
That's great.
I'd just like to say, from a historical perspective, you certainly have been able to give us the full gamut of the story and what you've been through, and thank heaven we still have you.
I'm around. I still have a kid in grad school. That was our deal. To get my kids out of school.
They were toddlers when she started.
Along with their mother.
Questions? Comments? All right.
I think the amount of detail that has gone into this study and the planning is very impressive. It certainly is a great basis to work from.
Yeah, and I think that's really valuable for all the jurisdictions and granting agencies like the Coastal Conservancy, for example. They're more apt to give future grants if they know this work's been done, it's coordinated, it's not a piecemeal. So it portends good things for the future.
Well, it seems to have been a very inclusive survey and study.
We had about, I think, 50 people come to 5 different focus groups, all with different specialties. And we got like 3 Coastal Commission staffers. And that's not easy, that their office is in Ventura, but people believe in what we're trying to do. So that's really gratifying.
All right, thank you again.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, and that brings us to item 9, the rental car concession amendment agreement.
This agreement, Rebecca Fribley, property manager, will make the presentation, but the concession agreements that we have with the rental car companies required a slew, no pun intended, of changes to various articles. We could read those off, but as you can see, they are posted. But Rebecca has worked very closely with the rent-a-car companies on this project, which is, in essence, transferring maintenance responsibility from the airport to a third-party vendor retained by the rental-car companies. So with that, Rebecca.
Thank you. As you all remember, in 2009, we were looking at getting ready to build the terminal and anticipating that it would open in 2011. And in order to do that, we had to take down the building that the rental car companies were currently occupying and the space where they had the ready return cars. So we built the quick turnaround facility to house offices, maintenance bays, car washes, and fueling, and allow them to do all those things which prior to that they had to do off airport. We subsequently did requests for proposals, and bids were awarded to Avis Budget, Hertz, and Enterprise, operating both as Enterprise National and as Alamo. After the building was built, the rental car companies entered into a participation agreement and formed a consortium with the idea that they would operate the QTA, since the airport personnel had no experience in running a gas station or a car wash or any of those types of facilities. Unfortunately, it didn't work out quite as well as we had hoped at that time. And little by little, we began to be concerned because the building and the facilities were not being maintained to the standards that we wanted to see them be maintained to. So we began little by little to have airport staff taking over more and more of the maintenance tasks, both of running reports, dealing with the fueling system, dealing with the cleanliness of the building, the landscaping, the parking lot, and all of the associated facilities maintenance. The way that we fund the operation of the QTA is by having them pre-fund annually a budget, and each budget is based on the budget the previous year. Over time, this is how the budget is kind of developed. The years 2011 and 2012, the reason the airport staff costs are so high is this is the point at which we were continuing to have more and more time spent over at the QTA, either administering the fueling system or making repairs or whatever it happened to be. And eventually we ended up with a half-time maintenance person assigned there, and also a certain amount of my time. We changed the fueling system and went out with a private contractor. Prior to 2013, we hired McCormick's to provide the fuel and the computer system to buy the fuel, to make sure that all of the permits and all of the regulatory agencies had their requirements satisfied. And as you can see, once they took over, of course, then there was less airport staff time and less money going to operating the facility. But last year, the rental cars came to us because they feel that they've gained in expertise over the last couple of years. There are many more of these joint use QTA facilities that are being operated by consortiums, and they're proposing that the QTA be operated by a third party, Avair Pros, who operates similar facilities down in Los Angeles and also in Monterey. In order for us to let the third party come in and operate the facility, we needed to amend both the participation agreement that was formed originally by the rental car companies and also their concession agreements. So what we're bringing to you tonight is a proposal that you authorize us to execute an amendment with Avis Budget, Enterprise, operating as Enterprise National, the Hertz Corporation, and Enterprise Rent-A-Car Company, operating as Alamo, to allow them to bring in a third party to operate the QTA. One of our concerns, just so you understand how long and how much has gone into this, is we did have our maintenance staff copy and put together every item that they maintain in that building. All of the schedules, all of the instructions. We have a 3-page amendment with a 60-page exhibit list covering how we expect this facility to be maintained by Avair Pros. So at this point, we are willing to give the rental car companies the opportunity to try this again. and we're hoping that you will approve the amendment.
Okay, I had one question. From the budget update, or the financial statement item, our next item, I noted that there is currently a half-time maintenance staff person on, I presume that's airport staff, for which, by the way, you haven't been reimbursed. So what impact would this amendment have on that staff person?
We would receive approximately half of the value that's listed in the budget, because the budget was a 12-month figure, and this change in management would take place January 1st. So we would not receive reimbursement for the second half of the year for that person.
Right. Okay. So this person remains on staff, and you're not receiving a reimbursement from the facility.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right.
But
we're just billing for our time and resources to maintain the vacuum system, the hoses that are pulled out when they forget to put them back on the container or whatever.
So basically, this half time or half of this person then is picked up by just other revenue.
Right. Okay. They're fully funded through salaries and benefits, and then this is just a reimbursement for their time based on work order issues that are reports that we get.
What is the advantage to the rental car companies in they're having a third party manage the facility rather than the airport?
You notice that our cost for that work to maintain it averaged between $160,000 and $187,000 a year. They anticipate they can do what we do based on the standards that are in that binder that Rebecca mentioned. They can do it for less money. And we'll see. We will continue to bill for utilities and for some of the costs that we incur directly for that facility.
Is there a clear cancellation clause so that if they do not maintain it, we can step back in?
Part of what we did with this particular agreement was add a default provision that had not previously been in the concession agreement to cover that eventuality. And these agreements are now right in the middle of their term. They're going to be expiring in 2016, so we'll be going out with another RFP really before you know it. And at that time, if we have not been happy with the services that have been provided, we'll have the opportunity to change it back to the way it was with the airport doing the day-to-day management.
Well, it sounds like we're protected.
So they basically have about a 2-year trial.
Yes, that's correct.
If we were to recommend this as you've presented it, is this AvAir prepared and able to take control in the time frame that we've identified?
Yes, I just spoke with them today, and they're confident that they could take, not possession, but take over the business as of January 1st.
Other questions? Okay, we have staff recommendation that the Airport Commission authorize the airport director to execute these amendments.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of authorizing the airport director to execute?
Aye.
Aye. Oh, all right.
Thank you.
So it is. Thank you. And that brings us to item 10, the fiscal year 2015 interim financial statement and completed performance objectives.
Tonight, just to give you our first quarter review of our budget and performance measures, Tom Bullers, our administrative analyst, will present.
Good evening, Airport Commissioners. We're going to briefly touch on our revenues and expenditures and why things are going the way they're going. Here you can see that we have some variances that are up and some are down, but overall our revenues are up almost 8% if we just took the year at a quarter of our revenue budget. And well, that's for a variety of reasons. We had a couple of vacant properties, Big Brand Tire, one of them is filled. We actually only collected rent for 1 month because there was some, in lieu of a tenant improvement, they essentially didn't pay rent for a couple of months. The E-Bar is still vacant, and we lost quite a bit of utilities revenue from that facility being vacant. And the properties that Rebecca mentioned too are it's a significant vacancy. Those are actually rental revenue that exceed the Big Brand property. So the sooner we can fill that, the better. On a positive note, the GA activity has increased, and so we've gotten some more landing fees and fuel flowage fees. The rental car revenue, also positive. We anticipated that we would lose. Well, we wouldn't lose. We budgeted the minimum annual guarantee for the rental cars, so they pay the minimum. But actually, we sort of assumed that we would just make the minimum because of the loss of American Eagle and passengers, but it's actually increased. The rental car companies have said that they've changed their pricing a little bit, and it's kind of an anomaly, but it's a good thing for us. United over the summer changed their fleet mix, and so we actually saw a pretty significant increase in boarding bridge usage and landing fees, about 20% for the landing fees. And then we also received a water refund from Goleta Water District. It was about $110,000 this year for some expenses in fiscal year 14. On the expenditure side, again, mostly down, 11% below budget. This does not include encumbrances, about $800,000 at this point, mostly for maintenance-related contracts. Some of the highlights there, we've had some vacancies, which has resulted in some savings in salaries and benefits. I mentioned that we do have some significant encumbrances in maintenance contracts. And we also closed long-term Lot 2, and so we don't have those shuttle expenditures anymore. We're going to try to hold off as long as we can through the holiday period on restarting that. So to summarize, our revenues are exceeding our expenditures by almost $650,000 through the first quarter. But there's a couple caveats there. Our rollover budget means that we're almost $300,000 in the hole from the start. And then we're losing Frontier Airlines to a seasonal service, and we estimate that'll be about a $300,000 impact. So fairly equal at the moment, so we just need to be diligent for the rest of our fiscal year here. Some performance objective highlights. We developed special event guidelines for the Earl Ovington Terminal. It's available for public use now, I think starting November 1st.
Yes.
City Council adopted the revised minimum standards yesterday. The badging office reviewed and purged a lot of their database. In July, the FAA CERT inspector was out, and we had a 97% compliance rate for that. And we also awarded the contract for the runway 15 left, 33 right pavement rehab project, which is currently underway. And with that, any questions?
Well, another great job keeping things on track. I wanted to particularly congratulate you on getting the minimum standards approved by council. I personally know how much went into that.
You and Carl both.
Amen. The $643,000 surplus of revenue over expense includes the $109,000 refund.
Yes.
So in terms of cash flow from operations, that should probably be backed out, yes. Which would put us down around $530,000. And there's no debt service in that.
So looking ahead,
Debt service is included in
debt
that.
service is included in
Yes.
that?
At the
Okay.
bottom, yes.
My question was going to be looking ahead to next quarter when we have debt service, how is that going to be reflected? But if debt service is included in that, I would feel comfortable.
It's on this particular slide,
Second from the bottom.
Commissioner Wilson, it's a second from the bottom. Bond debt, do you see that?
Oh, okay.
Above appropriate reserves at $453,000. Finance, as they do with allocated costs, they debit our account monthly so that it's not a big surprise in December and June when we go to pay debt service. So it accumulates during the year.
That's
so
a
that those
comfort.
payments. It is. It certainly is. Keeps us on track.
Comments?
I was just wondering, the change in Frontier service, can you briefly describe it?
Frontier will withdraw their 4 flights weekly, which is what they pretty much have been doing for the last couple of months, on January 6th. They have indicated that they will maintain their signage and equipment in place. It'll just go dark. And they will resume operations in May. That's as of this week, and hopefully that will be the case. Now, whether or not they do May through October or May through December, I'm not sure. But the majority of that loss that we're going to experience will be on landing fees because they do fly the largest jet into the airport at the A319. So, and the boarding bridge fees, right? Those two. Boarding bridge.
And parking is always a big.
Throw in parking.
And concessions.
And concessions. There's a ripple effect with that, yes.
Has United done anything to increase their service to Denver to pick up for it, or indicated they might?
Not as yet, no.
But they're aware of it.
Yes, they're aware. As is most of the population in Santa Barbara.
And
Yes.
we know you're continuing a vigorous outreach program with the carriers.
I keep trying.
Other comments, questions on the financial report? All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you for the report. And that brings us to the director's report.
Only 2 items to draw your attention to. On the passenger count, we're still falling and will continue to fall. At first, I thought until we reached April when American Eagle withdrew their service. But now we'll continue to fall as long, probably through May when Frontier pulls their service. So I expect those numbers to go up as far as a deficit in passenger traffic. Also, just to let you know, we're going to host a sort of a annual thank you to our ambassadors at the terminal, and also the Visit Santa Barbara group that mans our visitors bureau there in the terminal, and just say thank you and host a small luncheon for them tomorrow. They do an excellent job. They're faithful of coming. They've got the patience of Job and know how to direct passengers to the appropriate source when there's questions. So we want to do that as well. And I think that concludes my report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer.
Oh, I was always just curious about all those tractors running around and how the pavement rehabilitation is doing, if that's on schedule. And
I'll have, yes, that is on schedule. I think we had initially we had some operational issues at the terminal, which kind of leads me into an introduction of a new staff member. We have been looking at this staff person or staff position for 12 months or longer. Kelly Canas is our new operations supervisor. And she started October 20. Goodness, that long already, a month. It seems like yesterday. But she started, and part of my dilemma here is that she started, but she literally started to work on the airfield, so it was like she was always here. She's just done an excellent job so far, and we're really pleased to have her on our staff. You'll hear more about what she does and what the operations division of the airport in February, when Tracy and Kelly will be doing their presentation on the staff roles and responsibilities. So, welcome.
Welcome.
Another question I heard, though I haven't laid eyes on it, but I believe there's an assistant airport director recruitment underway. Is that correct?
That's finally out this week as well. It's not called the assistant airport director. The city administration and human resources now have gotten away from assistants, so it is now called the airport business development manager, I believe, and it is on the street. We are advertising nationally through AAAE as well as locally. The applications are due on December 22nd.
And at what point do we get the determination on the airport commissioner appointments?
City Council does that December 8, I believe, is when they make appointments.
And how many applicants do you know that they have?
I believe for Airport Commission there were six or seven, I think. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Any questions on the director's report?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you, staff. We are adjourned.
Appreciate it.
At least they didn't call